Get out, boys, get out.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our February 3rd Thursday. We've got a lot to talk about, so we'll get going right away. Please, there's a lot of people on the call, so make sure everybody's muted other than those who are presenting. Our first presenter is Ben-Min Chang, Dr. Ben-Min Chang, who you've seen. He is with our he's with the Summerland Research and Development Center, and his current research focus is on grapevine stress management. Specifically, he's interested in managing cold, heat, and drought stress of wine grapes in the Okanagan Valley. So welcome to the Valley and welcome today, Ben-Min.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, so for my session, I will just basically just bring you some kind of update, latest discovery I have in our experimental vineyard here, and I will also mention about what happened in the valley during the cold events. So and give Jing better transition to him. Yeah. Okay. So first thing, I did a trunk dissection in our experimental vineyard recently, and looks like some vines they actually doing pretty okay. Like the Cap Franc. This is a younger vine though. Like they have only 4 years age, and we are seeing the green tissues over here. It looks like the xylem and even phloem looks pretty healthy. But however, on the other hand, we have an older Malort. They are showing like a dark brown phloem here, and the xylem parts looks like the color looks like more over the whitish color, and yeah. So, but overall, when I touch them, they still feel kind of wet. So I think the xylem might have some damage, but not like completely dead. And during the cold events in our vineyard, the temperature went to minus 25 degrees Celsius. That was the lowest temperature registered in our weather station. Okay. Oops. Run T. Okay. And the next slide here. And what happened in the past 2 years was we had two basically back to back 2 years of cold snap events. But this time is getting even worse. One of the things is the temperature decreasing rate was super fast, and every hour we're seeing minus 0.9 degrees Celsius dropping. That's the temperature decreasing rate. And overall, the minimum temperature, as I mentioned, it went to minus 25 degrees Celsius in Summerland. And also the overall time period under minus 18 degrees Celsius, it's longer than last time. Last time we only have the 42 hours. So this is kind of differences we had. Okay. So overall, based on our weather station data, these kind of events pretty common in the early days before we start growing European wine grapes. So for the whole industry, I think this is kind of a new challenge. So today we're so happy to invite Gene to be here, and I think he will talks about and discuss about the vine's recovery and what's the protection options we have. Yeah. So.
Okay. Dr. Jim Willwerth is an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences and a researcher in the Cool Climate Enology and Viticulture Institute at Brock University. The major component of his research program is focused on grapevine cold hardiness physiology and understanding how to maximize cold hardiness in vitis vinifera, and to further understand woody plant cold hardiness physiology and response to environmental conditions during dormancy. He has an extensive program on freeze mitigation, grapevine evaluations, and how genotypes can impact cold hardiness, vine performance, and wine quality. He also has a decade of experience with effective technology transfer to the grape grower community. We're super happy that he's here to transfer some information to us today. Again, please mute your microphones, and we'll save questions to the end of the session for both Ben-Min and Jim. So thanks for being here, Jim.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I'm sorry to hear about what's happening out in BC. But I'll try to talk about some of our experience here in Ontario. We've had quite a bit over the years. So I'll try to share some of the work that we've done in my lab group, experiences across Ontario over the last, holy cow, since like I had my first experience with freeze injury was in 2003. So what, 20 years of experiences, and then also talking with growers, seeing what's worked, what hasn't worked. And I have some slides to share just to kind of get you thinking and to put some things in perspective. But this is a total open floor for me to just learn more about what's going on with you guys, and to share whatever I can to help. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully, I don't know what's going on here. Do you see a presentation?
We are seeing your.
I just stopped that, so I'm trying to
Yeah.
get this.
We did see it. It took a couple seconds to load. So
Okay.
just do what you did last time again. Yeah, it's there. It's good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have this as titled as moving forward after cold injury in vineyards. Everyone can see this okay?
Perfect. Okay,
great. And so this was actually part of a talk that I actually gave to our industry in Ontario in 2023 or something like that, when after our latest freeze injury and after a little bit of recovery that we were seeing, and we're having renewals in the vineyards. So in terms of things, this is what you're going through right now, right? In terms of, what are some decisions to make following freeze injury? And you dealt with this last year, and now again, in some cases, 2 years in a row. And, so one of the first things you have to understand, and this is where some of Ben-Min's work and others in BC have really helped already, is what is the level of damage, out there? Where is the damage? Is it bud damage? Is it trunk damage? Are you going to see some vine death or likelihood of that? And so with that, it's going to tell you where the likelihood that the vines can be renewed and if they can be brought back into optimal production. There's also some things to think about moving forward, particularly if you have zero crop and if there is vine loss, you have to think to yourself, like, what are some of the other issues that may have led to this damage that, maybe led to those vines to be more susceptible to injury. So it could be the cultivar choice, site issues, short-term issues. Was it a heavy crop? Probably not, based on the seasons you've had, but disease might have been an issue. Long-term issues, poor site issues, poor selection of vines, poor plant material, viruses. You think about those things, because especially if you have one difference in one block compared to another one, same variety, these are factors that might have led to it. And then, what are your objectives moving forward in terms of both short and long-term plans? And I'm gonna talk more about that a little bit and take questions on these types of things. And could there be a better freeze mitigation strategy moving forward as well? Just trying to move this screen here. So the first thing is to assess the level of damage, because the number one priority is going to be maintaining and keeping the vine alive, particularly if you want to renew it. It's not about, you're looking at not just next year, but the following years if you want to renew these vines, right? And keep those vineyards. So you want to keep them alive, make sure they're productive before trying to get heavy crops on them. And you also want to mitigate those effects of cold injury on production, particularly if you have some vines that are damaged, but, can still produce some fruit. And so, you're looking at having renewal parts of the vine to improve the growth. And then during the season, just like you probably had to do last year, was you're going to have to change some management strategies. And that includes, how you're going to prune them right now, bringing up suckers if you're going to renew them, any type of training, canopy management that needs to be done. If there is a crop, managing that to really not stress the vine out anymore needs to. change your nutrition program, but your weed and pest management program are going to have to pretty much stay the same for a lot of it. So you have healthy trunks and vines moving forward. So one of the first things is the assessment part. So proper assessments to determine the level of injury is really critical. And that level of injury really provides the guidelines of what to do. Where the trunk is injured, or sorry, where the injury is present on the vine, and things like this to look at, age of the vine. So I like that last or that one slide from Ben-Min, about the age of the vine. So are you seeing more damage in older vines or younger vines? Is it across the board? What about vines that have maybe multiple trunks? If there was any winter strategies used, like hilling up, wind machines, like things like this, they might impact whether the vine can recover or be renewed. Because if the vines were like hilled up with soil or there was snow on the ground, anything like this, it might help those vines renew a lot better than without any snow cover, any type of protection at the graft union if they are grafted vines. I know you have some unique situations in BC compared to Ontario, and I appreciate those, and I'll try to take these into considerations and for question periods if I miss a point about specific BC viticulture. But really the goal after winter injury is getting those vines back to full health, fruitfulness, and back in balance, right? You've worked for all these years to get these vines into balance, and now you're going to be trying to balance vines in a period of imbalance. You're going to have vines of all different shape. Some are going to die, some chunks are going to collapse, some are just going to have bud damage, depending on the variety, location, and so on and so forth. And so what part of your pruning strategies is, as you always have to do, is to get rid of those damaged parts and start the renewal process to get those vines back to being renewed. You always have your renewal zone in the vine, and now you're looking at potentially renewing that entire vine, cordon, canes, and so on and so forth. So this is our general guideline that we've established in Ontario over the years, when it comes to bud mortality and adjustments. So if you have like between 0 and 15%, we always say just prune as normal. But once we start getting, around 30%, say to leave about more 50% extra buds, bring up some suckers to establish future trunks, cordons, so on. Then once we get up to 50% bud damage, these talk about primary damage, by the way. I do have that on the slide. You want to leave double the number of the canes or buds, I should say. You might want to leave some extra canes, extra long spurs, and continue to bring up those renewal suckers. Once you get over 60%, you're looking at phloem damage for sure. I would, in my experience, we always see some phloem damage when we get up to those types of bud mortality. So you want to be limiting your pruning, doing longer spurs, even if it's cane prune vines, to leave spurs. It leaves more growth points, distributes the growth points a little bit better, so you don't get as much bullwood. And you want to keep the vines alive, right? You want to have some photosynthetic capacity on these vines with leaves. And so by having more spurs and leaving longer spurs, it can help. And we've seen this over many years of a better way to manage vines. And I think others in BC, Washington, and others have given similar advice. So if you have minor damage, it's quite manageable, but the severe damage is going to lead to more vine loss, and it's going to create a lot more variability. And it's going to, unfortunately, I would suggest right now, do more minimal pruning and start to see what the growing season looks like with a lot of your decision making. Look at the overall growth, see what you get, see what pushes, see the suckers. If you're getting some suckers pushing, older vines are going to sucker a lot less. If you sucker extensively every year, those vines are going to throw less suckers as well. Some of your decisions is also, if you already have a lot of missing or weak vines, that might take into consideration about even bothering to renew the vines. And then you can always expect additional dieback in results of what I call hidden freeze injury. Death by 1,000 cuts, as some of my colleagues have called it. Just having a lot of phloem damage, xylem damage, and the vinyl collapse, especially once there's any type of water or other stress on that plant. So then, as I mentioned before, then I'm going to go over this really quickly, but these are just decisions to think about. Business decisions, basically. Whether other issues, other diseases, crop load issues, can these be addressed to fix the problem moving forward? Or is it a block that, you know, maybe I shouldn't replant this? You know, I show some pictures there of just like overcrop vines on the right, that Syrah vines on the bottom right. You know, look at the growth on the vine's super out of balance. Crown gall, you can expect more crown gall moving forward. Was crown gall an issue for some vine loss, that type of thing, and so on and so forth. These are, I'm going to go through quickly, but like these are things you have to think about in terms of what you want to do moving forward. These are very specific vineyard decisions to make, or vineyard issues. You know, everything from cold pockets and poor sites, wrong material, it's a poor match, poor rootstock, poor clone, or other underlying health issues. Like these are things to think about. You know, why move forward and spending the time to renew if there's some other problems that need to be addressed? This is the time to do that, to move forward in a proper manner. So that's where it is. Is it worth renewing the vines or replanting if it's really bad, right? And so what do your financials in the vineyard tell you? Have you been getting good crops? Have you been making money off the vineyard, and so on and so forth? If not, then maybe it's better time to replant or think of something, you know, what to do with that field. You know, so things is like, has always been a home for the fruit? That's always what we ask here. We've had a transition of some varieties that used to be really popular, not so popular. So when they got froze out, I'm not going to bother renewing those vines. I'll just replant, fix up the vineyard a bit, and go forward there. This is something that's really important. And, you know, how many times has the block been frozen out in the past? Is this happened 2 years in a row? Has it happened ever but since then? Like, did it happen in the past? Like, for some of you growers, I've been here around for a long time. You know, what's the traditional or historical freeze event? Like we used to always say, like 1 out of 10 here. You know, and you're probably okay, but if you're getting, you know, 3, 4, it's difficult to get a crop off those vines over time, and you're just gonna have more inconsistencies and so on and so forth. And then think about the freeze mitigation strategies. Like there's a lot of wind machines used, you know, but if you're going to be replanting or retraining vines, and you're like a 5 out of 10 or greater in terms of winter injury, maybe change your freeze protection strategy, like go into something like geotextiles or something along those lines. And I just want to put this out here because of the Canadian Grapevine Certification Network and so on. Start with clean plant material if you're going to replant. And things like rootstocks, clones, and the quality of the material, like virus-free material is really important. And a lot of my research now is looking at these different genotypes and looking at how plant material can be used for climate adaptation to deal with this extreme. And so many people are concerned with heat. And it's getting hotter, and that's all they're thinking about in Europe as well. I'm concerned about cold. I really am, because all it takes is that one cold event where a heat wave is one thing, and we can add water and deal with it this way. And Ben-Min's doing some great work with heat stress, but cold is tough to overcome. And so, but plant material, this is why we're looking at what are the hardiest rootstocks, hardiest clones, and looking at, you know, when you don't have freeze injury for a number of years, you start playing a little more tender varieties. And I'm totally cool with pushing the limit. You know, that's why we do research, is to help push the limits. But it gets to a point where you have to kind of reevaluate things. Say, hey, is that really the best variety? Because it's getting whacked every so years. Something else to think about. These are things that you're all going to have to deal with. And this is the result of cold injury, is you do get the direct losses of fruit, uneven or poor vegetative growth, and because of these things, your crop levels and your vine growth is out of whack, and so it's hard to achieve that goal of vine balance. When we didn't have freeze injury here for a number of years, all our crown gall kind of went away, right? We pruned it all out, and it was great. And then as soon as we had a bad winter, there's all the crown gall coming back. So again, you're managing crown gall even if the vines are surviving. And then you get this whole problem with loss of uniformity, loss of consistency, overall management issues, and so on. So it becomes more difficult, you know, and so you have some vines that are going to be having no crop on them, some having a full crop. And when you're managing these things, you know, it's more tedious. You're renewing suckers at the same time, which nobody likes to do, and these types of things. Do you want me to keep going, or I could stop here and talk about just vine renewal with the group with questions? But
Yeah, so we don't have any questions in the chat at the moment, but we can wait 30 seconds or so and see if people are popping in with questions. I know Ben-Min had some questions.
I don't want to just
Yeah.
talk. I just don't want to talk. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of people here and getting some
Yeah.
interactions, but I wanted to get like some of this information out there to get you thinking at least,
Yeah,
because it's going to be a different scenario for everybody. And I
yeah,
want to just make that point. And so you can all, think about what is best for you. And I know, there's people that I know I've seen on some people in the waiting room and stuff like that and seen names. And I'm like, well, I know you've been through some winters in Ontario and to use that information, to help as well, because we've had it more recently than you guys have. Like historically, I remember when I was a student, you'd always talk about the Pacific Northwest and cold, and Marcus Keller at WSU and all the work that he was doing on cold injury. And then, you had a lot of years where it wasn't very, we didn't have a lot of winter injury. And now it's kind of come back with some of these jet stream events, really with the polar vortex and then with the heat dome aspects that we're dealing with. And the problem with this cold, and why I say cold is a problem, is that when you get these systems come in, they get stuck. And so we have these longer periods of drought and heat and cold even. And that's where some of the extremes that we're seeing with some of the jet stream effects and the polar vortex and the heat domes and these types of things. And it's something I've been concerned about for a long time. And I've given talks about this in terms of how is climate change going to impact the Canadian grape and wine industry. But I didn't think it would happen at this type of frequency already. But but we had 2 polar vortex years in a row in Ontario, 2013, 14, no, 2013, 14 and 14, 15, back to back years. Wind machines really helped us in those years. In 2003, 2004, 2005 was when we didn't have a lot of mitigation strategies and we got hit real hard here. That was where our lowest crop years, where we were down like 20% probably production.
Okay, Jim. So yeah, the chat's filling up with questions. So I'll try
good. I just have to
reading
keep
them off to
talking,
you.
right?
Yeah. So latent bud firing potential. Okay, Zoom, like not my friend today. So latent bud firing potential off older wood that's spur pruned. Academic trials showing variance in ambient temperature near old wood, ? I know the buds have the same sensitivity. Do you have any comments on that?
So
older wood, basically.
on older wood, this is really interesting, and I don't really have a great answer for you. However, I can share some feedback that I got from Paul Boss Sr. He unfortunately passed away, but I was able to learn a lot from him over the years. And he was one of the growers around here that had spur prune vines. And we were looking at some of his different varieties and genotypes that he was in terms of breeding. And he always said there was a big difference in terms of varieties and cultivars in terms of what would push. I think that's what you're kind of asking in terms of the variance in latent bud firing. Is that what you're kind of asking off older wood? And it seems that it can be a variety effect as much as temperature. But I don't know really in terms of what the actual question.
Yeah, I think the question is whether it says academic trials showing variance in ambient temperature near old wood. Like, do you have any experience with that?
No.
Okay, let's just, okay. There's a lot of questions here. We have good success covering grass each year with mulch, then exposing in the spring. What's the geotextile approach? I know that you kind of had some.
Yeah, the geotextile approach is covering the vines with a polyester felt fabric. And you similarly, you train the vines low to the ground as if you're going to bury them completely with soil. But using these fabrics, what we found was that we could cut the ambient temperatures essentially in half. So we've had some trials where it hit -30 in Prince Edward County. And underneath those materials, it was -15, and the hardiness of the buds was around -19. So we looked at greenhouse effects of these materials, how they impacted bud hardiness and bud survival. And they've worked quite well. But again, I wouldn't recommend them unless you're getting freeze injury, often, and wind machines can't work. I think your productivity be much higher, growing vines traditionally and using wind machine to protect vines if you can, over using the geotextile if you want.
So
better
Jim,
yields.
the WSU people told us that when they did trials with geotextiles, they showed the same temperature under the textile as outside. And so I think soil moisture probably has a big impact with that.
It might, it depends. We looked at the surface area of the geotextile, how much, like how tented it was. And Quebec has been doing work as well. What we found, we tried to put geotextile over like entire vines that were trained like at normal heights, and we had zero effect whatsoever. But by using them, and I didn't put any pictures of geotextiles, but I could maybe share some geotextile information with folks, or give a talk just on geotextiles one time for you guys, if there is interest, to show you more on that. And maybe I can get some colleagues from Quebec to join in too, to talk about what we've been up to.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great idea. Next question, would you consider own rooted versus rootstock?
Ha ha ha. Okay, I think there's a lot of benefits to rootstocks over own rooted. The only thing with own rooted is that you don't you can renew vines easier. You could raise the cuttings. You could layer the vines. They'll probably sucker better. I'm not 100% sure on that, because I don't have a lot of experience with own rooted vines, because we have everything here is grafted. But I just know from other experiences, what some of the advantages are. Like, I know I was mentioning to the group before the talk, last week, I know in Minnesota, where obviously it gets cold every year, they're growing Marquette and some of the winter hardy hybrids own rooted, just so that they can bring up the suckers regularly, because Marquette is known to get late winter injury that leads to trunk damage. And so they're replacing trunks all the time. So they're using own rooted vines for that purpose, when I asked why they're not grafting them.
Okay, so there's a couple related questions. So specifically asking about 3309 rootstock versus own rooted, but also the next question is anyone looking at Foch as a rootstock?
I'm not. I don't know. I don't know if anyone that's looking at it myself. 3309 is one of the hardier rootstocks that's been shown in the literature with some of Stan Howell's research back in the day, and then we found some similar work with 3309.
Okay, you mentioned vine spacing. Can you elaborate?
Vine spacing. Oh, in terms of, that's more of a canopy management, and an issue with if you have spacing is too tight, for example, and you have too much vine vigor, that's a problem in the vineyard, then you could, and why bother to replant when you're struggling with your spacing of your vine, and vines crowding each other, and so on and so forth. That's what I meant by that one. Nothing to do with necessarily winter hardiness per se.
Right. How about, is there any negative in deferring pruning to the growing season, i.e. specifically trunk diseases?
Yeah, I guess that's a point. In terms of pruning back the wood in the growing season. But I'm not sure really what issue, what alternative you have, because you need to know what's dead and cut out the dead wood. If you're going to do some pruning in the growing season. But in a lot of times, you're like, when I'm talking about leaving the long spurs and so on, just let the vine grow. You don't have to cut anything back afterwards, per se, because you're probably gonna have such limited growth that it's not gonna fill out the whole canopy anyways.
Okay, wind machines, have they proven effective in managing this deep cold? You did mention that for you they did.
It depends all on your inversion, right? So if it's cold and you have a strong inversion, it will certainly, raise the temperatures in the vineyard quite a bit. I mean, we've had 12-degree inversions, and so we're raising the temperatures in the vineyard by 6 degrees roughly. That's something that's why they've been very effective for us in some locations in Ontario where we get those strong inversions. But if these cold events are coming in with a big cold front and you're getting strong winds with it, then the wind machines aren't going to be effective, right? So that's something else that you have to consider when you're looking at a wind machine is what are your freeze events like? Are they your calm, clear nights where the temperatures are plummeting really quickly, but you can get and you have these strong inversions, or are you getting these big fronts coming in like with lots of wind where you can't even run the machine? We have seen though, even when there's been damage and even when there hasn't been strong inversions, that running the machines and mixing that air around does seem to limit the damage. And we noticed that in some of those polar vortex years that we had, it was like questionable whether to run the machines. Some growers said, I'm not running my machines anymore. I'm done. Other ones said, I'm going to continue to run. And those that continue to run, they ended up having stronger vines and having a little bit better of a crop on them too. So that's something, I mean, every site's different, right? Not every site's going to be suitable for a wind machine. Not every situation's right for geotextiles. There's not a one, a silver bullet for freeze mitigation. I think of it as like bit like bird deterrence, right? Or, you got to use a combination of factors sometimes, or combination of methods sometimes.
Well, that leads right into our next question. So what are major mitigation strategies used in Niagara other than wind machines for bud protection and protecting the graft union? Do most growers just hope for the best?
So what are our major mitigation strategy in Niagara is wind machines. That's 100% the case. And we also do a lot of hilling, especially on younger vines. So we throw soil on top of the graft or above the graft union every year. So as soon as the block is picked, generally run a machine through like grape hoe with and start hilling do a couple passes and hill the graft union with soil. Again, that came back from some work that Paul Boss Sr. was doing at Childish Arms back in the day, throwing big hills and it helps to mitigate some of the damage. The other good thing is you hill up, and if you get some snow during a cold event, you might be getting some fruit off those suckers off the bottom of the vine. And so we'll run multiple trunks. So that's something else that we'll do in our, especially in our more marginal sites, more marginal varieties in terms of their cold. Some growers will use multiple trunks, and I have that actually on the slide there that I'm sharing. Actually, is using multiple trunks to have some spare parts, trunks of different ages. Do a lot of these types of things to have some insurance policies on the vine to deal with some cold mitigation. So it does seem to help. I've seen some growers put a small snow plow on the front of their tractor, and if there's a bunch of snow, hill the vines up with snow as well. So I've seen that was something that Matt Speck started to do. I remember at Henry Pelham and had good success with that. So I've shown that in some presentations in the past. And then when it gotten real cold, and especially if you do that before a cold event, if you have the snow, hill that snow, and then at least you'll get suckers and you'll get some fruit maybe you're picking from the ground, but at least there's something there.
Yeah, we have a grower down the road who did that, hilled up with snow. He wrecked his blade, I think, doing it, but he said that, and then he monitored the temperature at the graft union. The lowest it went was -12, and the air temperature was -25. So he has great hope for those vines in particular. So
the only problem with the snow protection is it's good while it's there, but it might, because you're getting a bit of that greenhouse effect that you even mentioned there, how it's warmer, the tissue there might be less tolerant to the cold over time. And the other problem that happens is the bark is dark and the radiant heat can warm up that tissue, melt the snow around it, and then you have a little cold pocket where that cold air can settle right at the base of the trunk. So there's pros and cons to the snow, but that's something else that we do. There's some people that are experimenting with geotextiles in Niagara. It's mostly done in our colder regions, where they're actually burying entire vines, like in Prince Edward County. But there are some producers here that are looking at geotextiles even within Niagara at some of their colder sites, and they're having some good luck with that.
Yeah, that there's a comment rather than a question. Geotextiles rely heavily on snowfall as the major insulation while using the soil temperature as a heat source. Most growers we have talked to said textiles can fail in cold temperatures without snow coverage on top. So it's
You get a lot better with snow coverage, but when I was mentioning about the -30, there was no snow at that time. So that was without snow cover. We found that to be the case. We had data loggers all throughout the vineyard with the textiles, and it was pretty consistent. But when you have snow, oh, it works. They work really, really well.
okay, what would be the impact of leaving more buds at pruning when secondary and tertiary shows high viability?
When you think about it, your primary shoots, or sorry, your primary growth is going to come from your primary buds. They're going to be the strongest shoots. They're going to be the most fruitful. So if you're leaving a lot more buds and you still have secondaries and tertiaries, I don't think it's going to, that'll be a good thing for you, but it's not like you can leave. I don't think you're going to be a situation where you're going to leave too many buds. You could always, if you end up with a lot of growth, you could always do some shoot thinning and so on. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that, because your tertiary growth is going to be very minimal.
We spur prune here. I'm thinking of leaving 2 spurs each with 2 to 3 buds rather than 1 spur, and
Yep.
rather than leaving longer spurs. So I guess more spurs versus longer spurs. Can you give your opinion?
Leaving 2 spurs each with 2. Yep, that works. That's the type of thing I'd be doing.
Rather than longer spurs, right? So yeah.
Yeah, you can leave longer spurs, or you could do this as well.
Oh, what's your opinion? Which is best?
I think they both be okay.
After last year's cold event, I followed advice and left 6+ buds per spur on spur pruned vines. Result in most cases was growth last summer, focused in the buds furthest out from the cordon with no or weak growth near the cordons. This has led to few canes near the cordon for pruning this year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's what we see a lot of that occurring. So we get a lot of push from the terminal part of the cordon or the cane. And yeah, this is one of the problems when with the cordon train system, is you're not going to get as much shoots pushing from the head of the vine like you would with the cane prune system. And so there's probably some cordon damage too, I would expect. If you're getting most of the growth furthest from the cordon, yeah, I would think that there's probably some damage in the cordon. And you're just getting some apical dominance there, probably. And so the thoughts, or did you bring up any suckers to retrain the whole vine? Because that's what you're going to be wanting to do here, is like even if your cordons, if you have cordons, you're going to want to be replacing them, because there's probably some damage within the cordon. So if you want to try to retain anything you can, and retrain those cordons. Even if it's one cordon one year and one the next, and until you get a trunk, if you can get a trunk, that's where I mean, like the suckering, what you see is happening in this year's growing season is going to be really important in terms of what decision to make.
Yeah, I think
Because
you and
that's
I
going to be
talked.
difficult to deal with in terms of this particular case and this
Yeah.
particular vine. If you don't have a sucker, like how do you get that vine back? Because you're not
Yeah.
getting anything pushing from the ground or pushing from elsewhere on the vine.
And it also gives you some insurance against late season collapse, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think you and I talked about that earlier. There's a you mentioned nutrient management. Could you expand on what micronutrients will be key to aiding our damaged vines to set them up for success and when to apply them?
Well, micronutrients for me are always something you just monitor for to see if the vine has some type of potential micronutrient deficiencies and looking at your tissue analysis and so on and so forth. I wouldn't be necessarily looking at any specific micronutrients to aid them, but what I would be doing is if you have a normal fertilization program where you're adding nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, things like this, your macronutrients, cut those back or not at all, because the vine has to start. You don't want to be pushing too much vigor, especially if you need to be retraining vines and you don't want to have big, thick bullwood for your trunks and things like this. But again, with your nutrient program, you might be seeing some weird stuff too, because if there's vascular damage somewhere, you might be seeing some things that look like deficiencies, but they really aren't. It's physical damage to the vine. So I wouldn't be spending a lot of money on micronutrients, to be honest.
I'm going to go back to hilling up or burying cane. How big of a hill are you looking for?
When we're burying a cane, or sorry, burying
Hilling up, how high?
yeah, so it's covering the graft union. So basically wherever your graft union is, you want to have the soil come up over above that.
How about
So
hybrids? Have you, sorry, I have a lot of questions, so I'm racing through. Planting more hybrids, do you feel it's a good option in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, again, that comes down to marketability and selling these. If it depends what you're looking at there. I mean, there are some new hybrids coming out. There are some existing hybrids that are pretty decent, but again, there's no hybrids that are going to be completely bulletproof to the weather either. We've done work with Marquette, which is really, really winter hardy, but in a warm winter, it loses hardiness much quicker than vinifera. And so it can be susceptible to trunk injuries in spring frost, late winter, trunk injury, late winter and into spring frost risk. So my feeling is there's no, like they aren't perfect. And so, the marketability of some of them I find is the biggest pitfall for some of the hybrids. Can you sell these as wine? Particularly, it might be more particularly challenging for you in BC, where your industry has shifted to almost 100% vinifera, whereas in Ontario, we have more hybrids than you have. And like if you look at Nova Scotia, you look at Quebec, there's even more hybrids there. So there's more consumer acceptance. So that's the biggest problem. From a viticulture standpoint, yeah, the hybrids can add a lot of resilience to different things, whether it's disease or cold or other things. But you still have to sell the wines. And so then you might be left with a different challenge.
And these cold tolerant varieties, how do they hold up under heat stress?
That's a good question. Some of them are grown in pretty continental climates where they get pretty hot, but then very cold too, in the winter. But yeah, that's a good point.
What would your advice on cold mitigation be for newly planted vines in such an event, specifically 1 year or less than a year?
Bury them. That's what I would do. Is make sure you cover them very well, with soil. That's what we typically do here. Like on our young vines, we'll definitely hill up more. Make sure they're hilled up. Old vines, sometimes people won't hill them up any longer, but the young ones usually are to cover up that young graft that's can be quite susceptible to the cold. Mulching and stuff can be not great because of rodents. That's my biggest thing I've seen with rodents, and even with geotextiles at times, is mice and stuff love being underneath that.
How about ground covers? Have you noticed interactions between ground cover and cold hardiness or survival?
Very good question. We haven't done a lot of work with interactions of ground cover yet. It's something that we're looking at doing with some new funding with one of my colleagues in our department we're looking at cover crops. Or we want to look more at some of these interactions. And that's something that is high on our list to do more work with.
So yeah, there's a question about what kind of geotextile that you're referencing and a recommendation and where to source, and also someone who's answered and said, check vitis.
Yeah, there's a number of different producers that make it, and there's some with different thicknesses and so on. So you can look at some of the different suppliers. We looked at a couple different ones. Hybertex was one, and Texel was another. And then there's a few other new companies that came out. I think it's all pretty similar, as long as it's similar type of polyester.
A question about soil health with hilling. So do you have research on how hilling impacts soil health? Are there strategies for how to minimize negative impacts to soil while hilling?
Yeah, I mean, so there are obviously, anytime you do any type of tilling, there's negative effects on soils. Like, there's nothing positive really about tilling except for incorporating organic matter and stuff like that. But what we try to do with some of the hilled vines, like I've seen it even done with permanent sods in the vineyards, where you're just mechanically moving soil and doing mechanical weed management underneath the vines and leaving everything else alone. So you're minimizing some of those negative effects to the soil by excessive tilling.
Have you made trials with 60% plus bud damaged vines where you pruned aggressively, like leaving half the buds, in the hope of having more latent bud push and focusing on vine structure in the long term?
Yeah, what you want to do is basically try to have some photosynthetic, capacity on the vine, right? So to have some leaves and shoots, doesn't really matter how pretty it looks, just to get the vine to survive so it can push suckers and it doesn't collapse, or you can renew that vine to where you need to, as opposed to having very few growth points on the vine that maybe a couple of them will push. Then you're just going to get strong bullwood, and you're not going to have, let's say, buds pushing at the head of the vine where you can renew a cord on, and things like this. It gives you more opportunities for vine renewal.
That's good. Do you have any more slides, Jim?
Yeah, well, I have these slides here in terms of just like looking at some of the, let me just get this. Like in terms of renewing vines, since we're talking a little bit about that, is, you're not going to have a lot of, maybe not a lot of growth above the vine. And so if you are, you might want to be bringing up several suckers to allow for that balance of growth. Because again, the less growth points you have, the stronger that growth is going to be on that shoot, right? That's a whole aspect about pruning and crop balance and vine balance and so on. And then why we don't leave too many buds or too little buds, and we prune a small vine very severely and we prune a big vine less severely, right? That's the whole nature of balanced pruning. And so if we're expecting that these buds aren't going to push much, that's one of the reasons why, we want to have more of these buds. And if we're bringing up suckers, we don't want to just cut them all back and just leave one. We want to leave multiple suckers to allow for that, for better growth, and having some of the backup suckers if one gets, destroyed somehow over the growing season. So when we're looking at renewing these vines, you want to retain suckers, and next year you're ultimately going to select those suckers for the new trunks if that's the case of renewing vines completely. And these trunks are really important, right? Because you want to have these for many vintages. So you want to be looking at, wood that's not super thick with like really large internodes. You don't also want really weak and spindly wood, just like you do for pruning, right? Think about the same type of pruning decisions that you make for cane selection and so on. And this is similar to what we were looking at for what you want to retain for a trunk. You want to have straight, I like straight trunks, right? I think most of you do, or all of you do. So you also want to make sure that they're not damaged ones or diseased ones. The ones that are not really crowded, and ones that are not growing sideways out of the trunk, right? And so you're going to have these suckers and you're going to tie them together basically and manage them accordingly to hopefully have a good trunk for future years. So here's an example of just like one vine in the growing season after winter injury, and kind of what this grower did. This was in Lake Erie North Shore, pretty vigorous vine. It's on fox sandy loam soil. And because it's a vigorous site, they left a lot of suckers. This is Merlot. And they did some leaf removal even, and they got a little bit of fruit to try to balance some of that excessive vigor. And you can see their trunks are pretty decent. They've hardened off well, on the vines. And you see there's some off to the side that are kind of growing, really roguely, I guess. And then you have other ones that are nice and straight right in the middle that you can select for trunks down the road for the dormant period when you're selecting them. So you can see there's lots of options available, and you could see by leaving that many suckers how it accommodated that vigor, right? If you imagine just what the vigor of that vine would be with just 2 suckers, and how much potential is there, because you have all that root potential, right? All that capacity is in those roots of a mature vine. And if you leave only a few growth points, it's going to grow like crazy, and you're not going to get proper wood that's going to survive long term. So I think
So-
that's that.
So
Yep.
Jim, so once we hit bud break, promise you'll come back.
Oh, for sure.
Right, because I know that there'll be a lot more questions, and even just representing this part of it, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's gonna all this is in stages, right? And so then there's what to do now when you're at this point, right? And so next winter you're going to be at a time where it's going to be, okay, what do I do with respect to sucker selection, retraining the vines? Crop level is going to be really important, right? How much crop am I going to put on these vines? And it's not going to be a standard answer across all vineyards. It's going to be site specific. So again, there's always going to be questions in proper decision making to have to take place at each one of these different stages of post winter injury when it first happens, to try to mitigate the damage, and then after you see what damage is there after your mitigation of pruning strategies and so on. Okay, now it's like, what do I do? I'm at a point now where are these vines going to get back into production and in full production in like another 2 years, or am I looking at a replant situation?
So someone's asked, when did the example that you have here, when did the grower cut back those Merlot trunks? Like, what's the timing on that?
These would have been cut back. They would have been cut back that year.
So late season.
So they would have been cut back, probably mid-season, I think, in this case. They cleaned them up. But the one thing is, leaving your trunks gives you something to tie to. Actually, no, these ones they cut back right away, I think, in terms of this vineyard, because I think this vineyard had 2 years of damage to it. That's right. So this is 2016 right here. So the trunk, okay, so so in this case, this is 2016 growing season. The damage occurred in 2014. So 2014, they didn't cut the trunk out. The winter of 2015, they cut the trunk out, and this is what they got in 2016. Does that makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like 2 years on, kind of.
Yeah.
Or 2
So
seasons.
this is what maybe some of you will be looking at for this year. No, yeah, for this growing season.
No,
be
next
next?
growing. Yeah, 2025.
Yeah.
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 So any reason
So
to drop the minimal fruit you might have this year? Or should you keep it?
You know, in a situation like this, keeping that fruit can help reduce some of that vigor, right?
Yeah.
I would look at it as a case by case basis, but in a lot of cases, you're probably going to want to drop fruit if you see some.
Ben-Min is asking about chemical desuckering. Would chemical desuckering reduce suckers' viability after the cold damage events?
I think so. I think so.
Jim, I'm going to call it. Thanks so much for this. It's so much helpful information. I'll remind everyone that this presentation will be up on the Wine Grape Council's website probably later this afternoon or tomorrow. Also, WSU has another seminar this afternoon at 3 o'clock. So you go to their website to hook into that, register for it. And also, I'd like to
Oops, you're muted somehow.
How much did you hear? Did you hear the WSU part?
Yes, WSC Power, we heard it. Yeah.
Okay. And there's also a presentation, one of Jose's students is giving a presentation on plant pathology and molecular virology, investigating the role of cluster thinning and viral load on the impact of grapevine viruses in the Okanagan. That's next Wednesday, February 21st, from 11 to noon. And if you need more information about that, you can contact Kate. It's April Roberts Mahovlik. So thanks so much, Jim. Thank you, Ben-Min. I will see you again soon. And again, we'll have Jim back a little later in the season as things develop and we have more questions, because I'm pretty sure that'll happen.
Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, let me know.
Yeah, Kate will share your email address if that's okay.
That's fine.
Yep, I think people do. So also there's this Southern Interior Horticulture Show is in Penticton tomorrow and Saturday. So there's information on the Wine Grape Council website about that as well. Thanks everybody for coming. We'll see you in March. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.